Let me tell you something that will shift your entire perspective. God doesn't need perfect pieces to create purpose. He doesn't need your life to be flawless. He needs it to be surrendered. And sometimes the only way he can get your full surrender is to break what you've been trying to hold together. That pain you're hiding, that scar you buried beneath your strength, that tear-stained pillow no one ever sees, it's not evidence of weakness. It's raw material for greatness. Because God is not intimidated by brokenness. He specializes in building masterpieces from what others call mess. You see, there's a transformation that begins in a woman after 40. It's not a number, it's a shift. Life has pruned you. Experience has refined you. You no longer chase what used to chase you. You don't cry over closed doors anymore. You've realized that rejection wasn't punishment, it was redirection. You've outgrown the need for approval, and that's when heaven starts paying attention. Because God can do more with a woman who is detached from her past than with one who is still clinging to it. Detachment is not about indifference, it is about dominion. When you can walk away from what you thought you needed, you make room for what God always intended. Emotional detachment is a divine discipline. It's the ability to say, I'm not moved by who stayed or who left. I'm not defined by who applauded or who betrayed. I am rooted in something deeper than opinion. I am rooted in purpose. And the moment you arrive at that kind of clarity, God says, now I can use her. He's not looking for the loudest. He's looking for the clearest. He's not drawn to noise. He's drawn to stillness. The stillness that comes when a woman no longer performs for love, when she no longer dances for attention, when her identity is no longer on sale for temporary affection. That woman becomes dangerous in the spirit because she's unshaken by flattery and unmoved by attack. She has become emotionally stable, spiritually grounded, kingdom ready. You've got to understand something powerful. God will allow the breaking because he has a blueprint. He will let what you thought was permanent walk out of your life so he can show you what eternal really looks like. What you call broken, he calls available. What you call ruin, he calls restoration under construction. And once you detach from the outcome, you are free to obey the instruction. Because purpose is not about what you feel, it's about what you were formed to fulfill. When you're over 40 and broken, you're not starting over. You're starting right, because now you're not led by emotion, you're led by revelation. Now, you don't pray to be liked, you pray to be aligned. You don't need the room to clap, you need the Spirit to speak. You've entered a season where you'd rather walk alone with God than walk with the crowd and miss your assignment. God builds with broken pieces because they're pliable. They've been stripped of pride, emptied of pretense, and shaped by fire. That kind of woman isn't desperate, she's discerning. She doesn't attach herself to just anything because she knows her presence is an investment. She has suffered enough to know her worth. She has let go enough to recognize peace. She is detached, not because she's hard, but because she's whole. God never discards broken pieces. He repurposes them for divine construction. When something breaks in your life, a relationship, a dream, a sense of identity, it feels final. It feels like failure. But in the economy of the kingdom, brokenness is not the end. It's the beginning of becoming. God is a master craftsman, and he doesn't throw away what we call damaged. He collects every shattered piece with intention. He gathers the tears, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the years you think were wasted, and he begins to build something eternal, not just for you, but through you. You must understand this. God doesn't use whole vessels that are filled with pride and ego. He uses cracked ones that have been emptied by experience. because it's through the cracks that his glory can flow. When you are broken, you're vulnerable, but in that vulnerability lies access. That is the place where heaven meets earth. That is the place where grace can flow uninterrupted by performance or pretense. A woman over 40 has often seen life bruise her plans, crush her assumptions, and test her endurance. But God sees every piece that fell when you thought you couldn't carry any more. And he never walks away from the mess, he steps into it. The pieces of your past are not liabilities in the hands of God, they are leverage. Leverage to lift others, to build wisdom, to shape influence. He takes what you thought disqualified you and makes it your qualification. The cracks in your soul become the openings through which his light shines. He is not in the business of replacement, he is in the ministry of redemption. He doesn't throw away broken things, he rebuilds with them. So the world will know it was never your strength that built the masterpiece. It was his. A woman over 40 carries a unique kind of wisdom only pain can produce. She has lived long enough to see that beauty fades, charm fails, promises break, and even the closest relationships can shift. She has tasted betrayal, swallowed disappointment, and faced silence in moments when she needed answers the most. But through all of that, something remarkable happened. She didn't just survive, she evolved. She became wiser, not just older. Her strength is not loud, but it is undeniable. It doesn't shout, it simply stands. This kind of wisdom cannot be taught in classrooms or gathered through titles. It is the kind that is earned through weeping in private while leading in public, earned through forgiving when she had every right to retaliate, earned by letting go of things she once prayed to keep. Pain gave her discernment, loss gave her perspective, and loneliness gave her clarity. She no longer lives for the applause of others because she has discovered the quiet power of being at peace with herself. She has learned that emotional strength is not the absence of feeling, but the ability to feel deeply without being ruled by those emotions. She knows when to speak and when to stay silent. She doesn't chase love anymore, she embodies it. She doesn't beg for doors to open, she builds her own. Her wisdom tells her when to walk away, when to stay, and when to trust that God is doing something even when everything looks still. The fire didn't burn her up, it refined her. The storms didn't drown her, they taught her how to swim. And now her words carry authority, not because of volume, but because of experience. Her presence shifts rooms, not because she demands it, but because she has become it. What you lost didn't weaken you, it exposed the unshakable core of who you really are. Loss is a divine X-ray. It strips away the layers you thought were essential, revealing what cannot be taken from you. When relationships failed, when opportunities dried up, when people walked away, you thought you were being diminished, but in truth, you were being revealed. The applause faded so you could hear your own voice. The doors closed so you would discover the one God was building within. What you lost wasn't your identity, it was the distraction from it. So many times we attach our strength to what we hold, who we love, or what we accomplish. But true strength is discovered in the absence of all that. It's what remains when the titles are gone, when the love you gave isn't returned, when the room grows quiet and the crowd disappears. That's where your core is revealed. And if you're still standing after all of that, then what was lost didn't break you. It introduced you to a version of yourself you never knew existed. You've got to realize heaven doesn't measure strength by your smile in good times. It measures it by your stability in broken times. You didn't go through loss to make you bitter. You went through it to make you better. Every piece that fell off wasn't meant to be carried into your next season. It had to fall so your foundation could be exposed. And that foundation, if rooted in truth and not in people, cannot be shaken. Loss doesn't mean the absence of favor. Sometimes it is the evidence of divine favor. Because when God is preparing to build something greater, he will allow subtraction before multiplication. What you lost didn't reduce your value, it revealed it. Emotional detachment is not coldness, it is clarity in disguise. It is the silent strength of a woman who has learned not to allow her emotions to sit on the throne of her decisions. When you are emotionally attached to outcomes, people, or expectations, you become vulnerable to manipulation, disappointment, and instability. But when you reach a place where your peace is no longer tethered to people's actions, you are not losing your heart, you are protecting your purpose. There is a difference between being numb and being rooted. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling, it means you start discerning. A woman over 40 who has walked through enough betrayal, heartbreak, and transitions eventually learns that not every emotion deserves a response and not every feeling should be fed. Emotional detachment is her armor. She has cried enough tears to know when it's time to release instead of chase. She has given enough chances to know when silence speaks louder than confrontation. It is not that she is distant, it's that she's discerning. And now, instead of reacting, she observes. Instead of trying to control outcomes, she surrenders them to the one who sees the end from the beginning. Clarity comes when your emotions no longer cloud your insight. That's where wisdom lives. In the quiet decisions made without emotional interference. When your spirit begins to govern your soul, your choices align with purpose rather than pressure. Emotional detachment empowers a woman to walk away from what no longer serves her calling without bitterness, without rage, and without apology. She doesn't need to prove her worth. Stability proves it for her. And from this place of stillness, she becomes a vessel God can trust, not just to survive storms, but to carry others through them. God waits until you no longer need validation to reveal your real assignment. As long as you're performing for applause, seeking approval, or chasing affirmation from others, your identity is compromised. You are not free to serve your divine purpose while still addicted to being seen, liked, or understood. True calling is not birth in the spotlight, it's birth in the secret place. God hides your real assignment until your heart no longer bows to people's opinions. When your soul no longer hungers for validation, your spirit becomes qualified for revelation. A woman over 40 who has endured betrayal, rejection, and seasons of invisibility begins to realize something powerful. The approval she used to crave no longer satisfies her. The rooms she once wanted to be invited into no longer define her worth. She becomes internally anchored. And that's when heaven begins to trust her with real influence. God cannot release the weight of your assignment to a heart that's still trying to prove something. He waits, he watches, he prunes, because the assignment he gives is not for your popularity, it's for his purpose, and he will not risk divine destiny on unstable identity. This is why some doors stayed closed, why some people left, why some platforms never opened. Not because you weren't capable, but because you weren't yet detached from needing recognition. But when you come to the place where you can serve in silence, obey without attention, and move without applause, you are finally ready. Ready not to be celebrated, but to be effective. And in that moment, God says, now she can carry this. Now she won't corrupt it with ego. Now she won't abandon it for acceptance. Now I can trust her with what is eternal. Spiritual strength is forged in isolation, not in applause. It is in the quiet places, away from the noise, the crowds, and the compliments, that God builds the unshakable foundation of a woman's soul. Applause can inflate you, but isolation shapes you. It strips away distractions, exposes hidden motives, and reveals what's truly in your heart. In isolation, you are not being ignored, you are being prepared. God often removes the crowd so that you stop depending on external voices and start listening to his. That's where real strength is born. A woman over 40 who has walked through seasons of silence understands this truth deeply. When the phone stopped ringing, when the support vanished, when the applause faded and she was left with nothing but her faith, something sacred was happening. Her roots were going deeper. Her prayers became more honest. Her worship became raw. She wasn't performing anymore. She was surviving on the presence of God alone. That kind of intimacy cannot be developed in public spaces. It's cultivated in the wilderness, where God becomes your only source. In that solitude, she learns the language of heaven. She stops begging to be seen and starts yearning to be used. She no longer needs validation because she has encountered revelation. The silence teaches her that strength is not loud, it is consistent. That presence is not always felt, it is known. And once she emerges from that place, she doesn't come out needy, she comes out anointed. Because spiritual strength is not proven by how loud you pray in public, but by how long you endured when no one was watching. Applause may feed your ego, but isolation feeds your spirit. And it is in that unseen place that God builds the woman who can carry visible glory. Purpose emerges from brokenness when identity is no longer tied to people or outcomes. As long as your sense of worth is wrapped up in who stays, who leaves, or what you achieve, your purpose remains imprisoned. God will allow brokenness not to destroy you, but to disconnect you from false attachments, from shallow affirmations, from outcomes you cannot control. Because only when your identity becomes rooted in who He says you are, can your purpose truly unfold. Brokenness then becomes a gift. It strips away the illusions. It removes the masks. It forces you to confront who you are without the applause, without the titles, without the people. A woman over 40 often reaches this sacred place after years of trying to hold everything together. She has carried others, built homes, sacrificed dreams, endured loss, and still showed up. But somewhere along the way, she realizes the cracks in her life were not signs of failure. They were invitations to freedom. The breaking came to free her from the performance. The pain came to wake her up to her deeper calling. She no longer needs to be everything for everyone. She only needs to be aligned with her assignment. Now, that assignment cannot be revealed to a woman still enslaved to outcomes. God waits until you no longer define yourself by what worked or didn't. When your identity becomes rooted in the eternal, not the external, purpose begins to rise from the ashes of your past. That's when clarity comes. That's when direction becomes undeniable. Your purpose is not the product of success. It is the fruit of surrender. And brokenness is often the door through which surrender walks in. When you no longer need things to look a certain way, you are finally ready for them to become what God intended. The woman who no longer cries over what left is the one heaven can now trust with nations. There comes a moment in a woman's life when tears no longer fall for what walked away. Not because she is hard, but because she is healed. She has mourned long enough. She has asked why long enough. She has carried unanswered questions, wrestled with silence, and finally arrived at peace. Not because she got closure, but because she chose clarity. That's the moment heaven takes notice. Because now her loyalty is no longer tied to who stayed, but to the God who never left. When a woman stops grieving over what abandoned her, she starts leaning fully into what God has assigned her. That is the turning point. That is where divine trust is established. God cannot entrust influence to someone who will abandon their mission for the sake of emotions. But when He sees a woman who has buried her disappointments without burying her hope, who has let go without losing her joy, He knows she is ready not just for restoration, but for responsibility. A woman over 40 has usually come to know this place. She has cried enough to know the value of stillness. She has lost enough to no longer fear loss. She no longer begs for closure from people who never valued her presence. She has exchanged sorrow for strength, not because her life became easier, but because her faith became deeper. When you stop weeping over what left, you start walking in what's ahead. The tears that once watered your pain now water your purpose. And heaven says, now she's ready. She won't chase shadows. She won't delay destiny. She will carry the weight of nations because she no longer bows to emotional entanglements. Detachment from distractions births attachment to divine instructions. You cannot fully hear God when you're still entangled in what he never sent. Distractions don't always come in the form of obvious sin. They often come disguised as good things that pull you away from the God thing. Emotional clutter, toxic attachments, endless obligations, and people-pleasing routines are all enemies of divine clarity. As long as your heart is crowded, your ears remain dull to heaven's whispers. But the moment you begin to detach, truly release what no longer aligns with your spirit, you create space for divine strategy. A woman over 40 has often walked through enough noise to finally value silence. She has been pulled in enough directions to realize peace is more powerful than attention. She no longer attaches herself to every opportunity, every conversation, every invitation. Her discernment is sharper. Her time is sacred. Her soul is not on auction. She begins to protect her focus the way she once protected her feelings. Why? Because she understands that divine instruction rarely shouts. It speaks in stillness. And stillness requires detachment. When God wants to elevate you, he will first isolate you, not to punish you, but to recalibrate you. He cannot pour fresh oil into a vessel still full of distractions. The detachment feels like loss at first, but it is actually positioning. You're being pulled away from the noise so you can hear the next level of instruction. And what he's about to release isn't for the emotionally scattered, it's for the spiritually anchored. When distractions die, purpose awakens. When detachment is embraced, clarity becomes consistent. And from that place of stillness, God begins to reveal what eyes haven't seen, ears haven't heard, and minds haven't conceived. Because your spirit is finally tuned in, and your hands are finally empty enough to receive. God uses the woman the world overlooks to build what the world cannot destroy. While others chase visibility, recognition, and platforms, God is searching for hidden vessels. Those who have been overlooked, underestimated, and even forgotten. The world may have skipped her, but heaven marked her. She may not have fit into society's mold, but she fits perfectly into God's blueprint. He chooses the rejected to demonstrate redemption. He chooses the quiet ones to release thunder. He chooses the broken ones to reveal glory. The woman who is ignored by people is often the one trusted by God because her identity is no longer shaped by the world's applause. A woman over 40 knows what it means to be invisible. She's been passed over for younger, louder, more polished versions. She's been in rooms where her voice was silenced, where her value was questioned, where her contributions were minimized. But none of that disqualified her. In fact, it prepared her. Because in obscurity, she learned to hear God clearly. In rejection, she discovered resilience. In isolation, she found her true identity. And in every quiet moment where the world wasn't watching, heaven was recording. God never builds greatness on unstable ground. So he waits, he watches, he prepares. And when the foundation is ready, when ego has been stripped, when pride has been buried, when purity has been restored, he begins construction, not with fame, but with fire, not with platforms, but with purpose. And what he builds through her, no man can tear down. What she carries, no system can cancel. Because her source is not public approval, it is divine assignment. She didn't force her way into the spotlight. She was summoned. And when God summons the overlooked, he builds through them something eternal, unshakable, and absolutely unstoppable. So hear me today, and hear me with your spirit. You are not too old, too late, or too broken. You are right on time in the hands of the master builder. Everything you thought disqualified you is exactly what God will use to establish his glory through your life. The tears you cried, the pain you endured, the silence you survived, they were all shaping a woman this world cannot define and hell cannot destroy. You don't need to be validated to be valuable. You don't need to be seen by people to be chosen by God. Heaven is not looking for the loud, it's looking for the yielded. You've been broken, yes, but broken into purpose, broken into clarity, broken into divine alignment. Now rise, not for applause, not for revenge, but for assignment. God is building something in you that cannot be shaken. And he's using every scar as a cornerstone. You are the masterpiece in motion. And your best chapters were never behind you. They were waiting on your surrender. The world may have overlooked you, but God never did. And now he's about to make through you what the world will never be able to explain.